Well, let's talk now about a subject that's near and dear to our hearts here at RT America, whistleblowers. We've been recently covering the Bradley Manning case extensively, and despite more and more people being arrested and convicted for speaking up, there are some who think we're going too easy on whistleblowers in this country. Here's Senator Joe Lieberman on NBC's Meet the Press yesterday.
I think we're on a slippery slope where people think there's no accountability if you leak. And we've got to change that. I think we've got to change the law that's applied here. The last person to be convicted of a crime for leaking to the media was more than 25 years ago. We're still using a 1917 Espionage Act that requires some showing of intent, a knowledge that a leak would harm the security of the United States. But, Chris, it seems to be...
Well, guess what? That Espionage Act has actually been used by President Obama more than every president before him. It's been used to charge the following people: Thomas Drake, Shammai Leibowitz, Stephen Jinwoo Kim, Bradley Manning, Jeffrey Sterling, and John Kiriakou. So I want to talk a little bit more about this. I've got Jessalyn Radack, National Security and Human Rights Director for the Government Accountability Project. Jessalyn is also the author of Traitor, the Whistleblower and the American Taliban. And Jessalyn, that book written about your experience being a whistleblower yourself, talking about the case of John Walker Lynn, the American Taliban. First, let me just ask you your reaction to Senator Lieberman's comments over the weekend.
I think he is completely out of touch with what's been going on for the last 2 years, which is people, most of whom are whistleblowers, being prosecuted under the Espionage Act, which is meant to go after spies, not whistleblowers. And to the extent that he may be propelled forward by the events of the last week in terms of the House and Senate Intelligence Committees being angry that the White House appears to be engaged in high-level leaks of classified information, including sources and methods, and that there needs to be a greater leak law. He's completely wrong that we need a broader leak law. I mean,
let's talk about it, because the Espionage Act, it has to do with intent. The person being charged has to show that they intended to harm this country. And it seems to me that Senator Lieberman wants to take this several steps further.
Yes, he would completely dilute that and remove that intent requirement, which I hate the Espionage Act, but the only saving grace of it is the intent requirement that Judge Ellis grafted onto it during the APAC cases, so that it's not just that you disclosed secret information, but you were actually intending to harm the U.S. or benefit a foreign nation. And he would do away with that completely. Additionally, Lieberman's legislation would not apply. It wouldn't just criminalize disclosures of classified information. It would criminalize disclosure of any national security information, which is pretty much everything in this country right now.
Yeah, you can sort of connect anything to national security. I know the Bradley Manning case is one that we've talked about extensively, and it's one that has proven that the information that he allegedly leaked to WikiLeaks, the website, none of that information has caused any direct threats or, action against the U.S. So I guess talk a little bit about this mentality. It is, of course, not just Senator Lieberman. We put him up as a recent example. A lot of people want to do away with whistleblowers. What do you think is behind this?
Well, I think they want to do away with whistleblowers because they reveal government fraud, waste, abuse, illegality, mistakes, embarrassment, and crime. So, of course, people in the government want to do away with them, failing to realize that or forgetting that this country was founded on being an open and free democratic society.
Well, speaking about an open and free democratic society, I mean, this is an issue that President Obama said, he wants there to be a lot more transparency, because certainly we remember in the final Bush years, it seemed like so much was just sort of swept. Let's classify this. Let's classify this. So President Obama, especially on the campaign trails, talked about transparency, talked about wanting to be an open president. To what extent has that happened?
Not at all. He's been he extended the Bush secrecy regime beyond anything I could have imagined. He came into office pledging to protect whistleblowers and called them courageous and patriotic, but he has treated them like criminals. And the people he's gone after, I mean, the Tom Drake case completely imploded because he had not disclosed or retained any classified information. And I think having a broad anti-leak bill that would basically criminalize the disclosure of any national security information would hurt whistleblowers. It would hurt ambassadors around the world doing press briefings. It would hurt journalists. I mean, it really would lead us down the garden path to the censorship upon which this country was founded against.
Let's talk about kind of the timeline, the evolution here of this mentality about whistleblowers. I would venture to guess that 9/11 certainly has a lot to do with it, or at least the excuse it brought forth the Patriot Act. But we have come a long way, and by a long way I don't mean progress. I mean, we've come a long way back from Daniel Ellsberg, who leaked the Pentagon Papers. He was hailed by so many as a hero, not right away, but over time. He was looked at as somebody who was brave, somebody who brought about the truth of what was actually happening behind the Vietnam War. People are not seen as heroes these days, at least in a lot of cases. I mean, young Bradley Manning, private first class, a young man in his 20s, is seen, by some as a terrorist in this country. What has happened? How have we gotten to where we are today?
Well, I think Bradley Manning and other people who have been accused of leaking have been completely vilified. You only get the government story out there until you have attorneys like myself who try to explain the other side of these people who are not allowed to talk while they're criminal defendants. I mean, they can't go on TV and tell their side of the story. There's a ton of fear-mongering by the administration that's been going on since 9/11. I think if you look at that broad anti-leak measure under Clinton, that was in 2000, and he vetoed it. And the big difference between 2000 and now, as you point out, is 9/11 happened. But I don't think 9/11 is a reason to do away with our democracy, and we've been slowly chipping away at First Amendment activity and protected speech in this country since 9/11, curbing civil liberties. But the First Amendment has taken an especially hard hit, and it affects not only whistleblowers, but journalists, upon whom they rely on whistleblowers for their trade, and we rely on them to have an informed public debate about things of public interest and public importance. If you're going to have a self-governing democracy, you need information. That doesn't mean we need troop movements. That doesn't mean I need undercover intelligence identities.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, certainly as a journalist, I've always been a big believer in, having as much information out there as possible. But I think what gets sticky is when you start calling for whistleblowers not to be punished so severely, is you have people who say, you know what, then, well, there's going to be a lot more people just like Bradley Manning who will leak those troop movements, those secrets that will be harmful to national security. So, Jessalyn, what's the answer here? How do we make a more specific or a more defining line on what is safe to blow the whistle on and what isn't, on a level that not the government would come up with, but that normal people, normal Americans would
right
agree.
Well, I think if the Obama administration were really serious about curing the WikiLeaks problem, it would enact meaningful and effective whistleblower protection legislation, especially for people in the national security and intelligence fields. And as you pointed out earlier with Bradley Manning, he didn't really leak anything that has been shown to harm the U.S. Ellsberg himself says that he thinks that history will see Bradley Manning favorably. And Bradley Manning did, in fact, disclose, allegedly, war crimes. No one has watched the collateral murder video and said, nah, no war crimes going on there.
I think that's a good point. So, this is Senator Lieberman yesterday on Meet the Press putting this out there. What do you think the chances are? I mean, do you think that this is an idea that is held by enough lawmakers here in Washington that they're going to get this passed, harsher restrictions, harsher punishments for whistleblowers?
When it came out a year ago, it really didn't gain much traction at all, and the New York Times, the mainstream media, editorialized against it. But in this climate, which really is, it's a leak on steroids, leak hysteria, I actually think President Obama could sign a measure like this, which, again, would be a backdoor way of creating an official secrets act, which we've lived without in the United States for more than 200 years.
How do you think this plays in November? I mean, as you said, President Obama has, used the Espionage Act more times than anyone else. He has not. He's done the opposite of what he said in terms of transparency. But, Mitt Romney is likely to be the same or even more stringent when it comes to secrets. I mean, do you think this is an issue American people will even ask about, that voters will demand an answer to?
I think they should. I don't know. I mean, I think the reason the leak hysteria of the last week and a half was triggered was because we are in an election year. And suddenly, though it was bipartisan, it was both Democrats and Republicans on the House and Senate Intel committees were making the accusation about the White House leaking highly classified information for political gain. I think both candidates should be questioned about it rigorously.
It should be, an
both
important
sides.
issue. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Always good to hear from you, Jessalyn Radek, National Security and Human Rights Director for the GAP, the Government Accountability Project. Appreciate having you on.
Thank you.